The saying, "you are what you eat," usually refers to your body, but it may actually be true when it comes to your mind too. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about whether processed foods, fast foods, and baked goods cause depression, and also how the amount that you exercise may actually affect how these foods influence your mood. And spoiler alert, some of these types of foods that I listed affect depression, whereas others don't. So stay tuned to find out which ones might be contributing to depression and low mood. Hey there, I'm Mish, and I am a full-time researcher with my PhD, sharing the results of scientific studies here to help you reach your nutrition, health, and fitness goals. And in today's video, I'll be briefly covering 3 studies to look at how processed foods, fast foods, and baked goods might be contributing to depression, and how exercise affects how these foods influence your mood. Before we get into it, I just want to take a moment to say thank you so much to everyone who donated to the fundraiser to get better equipment here. I really can't thank you enough for your incredible generosity. We are already over halfway there to the goal to be able to replace my 7-year-old camera that dies constantly, and therefore be able to have an external microphone so we can improve our audio quality, video quality, and turn these episodes into podcasts too for people who want to listen on the go. So if you would like to help make this dream a reality and help us get over the finish line, please check out the link to the GoFundMe in the description below and also in the card up here. And now on to the science. I'm just going to start with something that will apply to all the studies, which is the fact that all of the results I'm about to tell you about are controlling for weight gain. So I imagine you probably know by now that eating more fast food, processed foods, and whatnot causes weight gain, and weight gain very often leads to depression. Those are both very well-established effects. So in that sense, it seems pretty obvious that if you eat more processed foods and then that makes you gain weight, then yes, you're going to have a higher risk of depression. But all of these studies actually control for weight and weight gain, so all the effects I'm about to tell you about are actually how foods are influencing your mood, in addition to any effects that could be caused by weight gain. So just want to throw that in there for anyone who's thinking, well, duh, eating processed foods will make you depressed because you get obese and then you get depressed. But that is not the case for this video. And in addition to controlling for weight/BMI, these studies also control for lifestyle factors. So people generally being healthier people and not smoking and exercising more and having less health conditions, all of that is controlled for. So this is looking at how processed foods and fast foods and baked goods affect depression for a given level of exercise and healthy lifestyle and health conditions and all that. So it's not driven by any of that stuff that I'm sure many of you will very smartly think of while watching this video if I didn't give you this up front. And for the first study I'm going to touch on, it is a meta-analysis, which you may remember from my other videos is the gold standard of studies because it actually does analyses across a bunch of other studies to find out what the real effect is. And this meta-analysis includes 21 studies looking at how different dietary patterns predict depression. And this study is the least specific of the ones I'm going over, so we're just talking about big, general dietary patterns and not yet getting into the specific categories, but the next 2 studies will do that, so stick around for those. And this study compared 2 different dietary patterns that they identified across all these 21 studies, and I'm going to read the list to you of what kinds of things were included in each pattern, just to make sure I don't miss anything. So first, for the unhealthy dietary pattern, as they referred to it in the study, people had higher intakes of red and or processed meat, refined grains, sweets, high-fat dairy products, butter, potatoes with high-fat gravy specifically, and low intakes of fruit and vegetables. So that's the bad dietary pattern, as they're calling it. And then the healthy dietary pattern, as they call it again, is characterized by a high intake of fruit, vegetables, whole grain, fish, olive oil, low-fat dairy, and antioxidants, and low intakes of animal foods, is how they say it. So these are just general dietary patterns. They weren't selected to include specifically the best or worst categories for depression or anything. It's just kind of a broad strokes way to look at how diet might be predicting depression risk. And for the first finding, the unhealthy dietary pattern that had more animal foods and more refined foods had a 20% increased risk of getting depression. And on the other hand, the people who ate a more healthy dietary pattern on average had a 46% reduced risk of depression compared to neutral. So the people who ate an unhealthy diet with a lot of animal foods and refined foods had a 20% increased risk of depression compared to neutral baseline of everyone, whereas the people who ate a more healthy diet with more fruits and vegetables and less animal products and less refined products had a 46% reduction in depression compared to the neutral baseline. So that's just like a nice initial foundation for seeing that diet does really seem to strongly predict depression in terms of healthier versus unhealthy diets. But I have a feeling people kind of already know that. So I feel like the more interesting thing is to look at what specific categories actually matter most for depression. And that is what the rest of this video is going to be about. Sorry the lighting here changes so much. It's my sunroom and it's always partly cloudy here pretty much, like part sun, part cloud, so it changes a lot. But I'm actually not wearing any makeup on my face, so it's weird that my face looks all ghostly compared to the rest of me. I think it's just closer to the light or something. And for our first look at specific categories, we are going to a study that looked at 9,000 people over 6 years to look at how their dietary intakes of fast food and baked goods predicted subsequent risk of developing depression over the course of those 6 years. And this type of longitudinal design is really the second best option we have for looking at how foods might affect depression, because unlike a cross-sectional study, which just looks at correlations in the moment, which is not going to be very informative for depression and diet, because if you're already depressed, then obviously you're going to be eating worse because you don't have as much energy or motivation to cook. We need these kinds of longitudinal studies that actually follow people over time to see how food, when they're not depressed, predicts later risk of then developing depression. So we can see a little bit more cause and effect here by looking over time. And of course, the gold standard for looking at how food definitely causes depression would be to look at randomized control trials, but there isn't really much of that going on right now with processed foods and depression, at least yet. But I will keep my eyes peeled, of course. Now to break down what these categories actually included. For their fast food category, they counted hamburgers, sausages, and pizza, which was a little weirdly limited for that category. So I'm gonna go ahead and modify that title to animal-based fast foods because they are notably missing French fries and soda and that kind of stuff. Their baked goods category was a little more normal and included all the standard stuff like muffins, donuts, croissants, cookies, other kinds of baked goods. And they found that as animal-based fast food consumption increased, people's risk of later developing depression also really increased. So eating more animal-based fast food predicted a hugely increased chance of developing depression later. And specifically what they found is that the people who ate the most fast food, or in the top 20% of animal-based fast food eaters, had a 40% increased risk of developing depression over the next 6 years. So to put that in more real-world terms, let's say we're looking at you plus a group of 9 of your friends, so there's 10 of you total. If you are one of the top 2 fast food eaters, so you eat more fast food than 8 of your 9 friends, then you are way, way more likely to develop depression over the next 6 years. And I want to note that these aren't just depressive symptoms like low mood, this is full-blown depression. So you can bet that for every person who developed full-blown depression in this study, there are many other people having gradually ramping up depression symptoms that just aren't quite up to the threshold of being diagnosed. So just because I'm talking about full-blown depression here doesn't mean that we're not getting effects of fast food and processed foods and whatnot on overall depressive symptoms. It's probably more of a continuum, as things pretty much always are in psychology. So interestingly, in contrast to the findings of animal-based fast foods massively increasing later risk of depression, there was no effect of baked goods, at least no linear effect. So there was this kind of bizarre function where the people who ate the second least baked goods, so just one step above the lowest baked good consumption, actually had the same risk of depression as the people who ate the most baked goods. So maybe there's something going on there, but it's super unclear and definitely not a standard dose-dependent effect where the more baked goods you eat, the more depressed you are. Whereas with the fast food, it was the case that the more hamburgers, sausages, and pizza you ate, the higher your risk of depression. And so of course, for my little commentary time here, it's always fun and horrifying to see how quick most of society is to jump on the train of demonizing refined carbs and sugar and say that it's causing all our problems, whereas yet again, when you actually look at the science, it's the fat that's causing the problems. So again, here we see that baked goods filled with refined carbs and sugar are not having a significant effect on depression, whereas animal-based fast foods, pretty much just fat and no sugar in this specific study, is predicting massively increased risk of depression. So here we see it yet again, another study that will not be reported in the mainstream media, but here I am making videos in my little corner of the internet, so hopefully someone can see the results of this study. And now for our last segment, we're going to look directly at the level of processing that a food has undergone. So this study specifically looked at ultra-processed foods and how it predicts subsequent depression over the course of 10 years in 15,000 people. And they used the official NOVA classification for what counts as an ultra-processed food, and I will read you the list of some examples they include. It includes things like carbonated drinks, processed meat, biscuits, aka cookies, candy, instant packaged soups and noodles, sweet or savory packaged snacks, and sugared milk and fruit drinks. And much like the animal-based fast food results from the last study, they found that eating more ultra-processed foods affected depression in a dose-dependent way. So the more ultra-processed foods you ate, the higher your risk of depression over the next 10 years. And specifically, the people who ate the most processed foods, so people in the top 20% of processed food eaters, had a 30% increased likelihood of developing depression over the next 10 years. And I just want to point out that this effect from processed foods actually seems to be quite a bit smaller than the effect of animal-based fast foods from the last study, because being in the highest 20% of people eating hamburgers, sausages, and pizza predicted a 40% increased risk, whereas being in the top 20% of this ultra-processed food group in this study predicted a 30% increased risk. So a little bit less bad, it seems, than the animal-based fast foods. And now for the craziest and most interesting result of this video, I think. The researchers found that the amount that people exercised had a massive influence on how much processed foods predicted depression. So specifically, they found that when people exercised more often than average, so in the top 50% of exercisers, they had only a 13% increased risk of depression if they also were some of the most processed food eaters. Whereas people who exercised less than average had a 50% increased risk of depression when they also ate a bunch of processed foods. And to put that in clearer terms for you, let's say you're someone who eats a lot of processed foods, like a lot of instant noodles, a lot of soda, a lot of meat, a lot of candy, then it really matters how much you exercise. So if you exercise more than the average person, you're going to have about a 13% increased risk of depression from your diet. So all those processed foods are going to give you a 13% increased risk of depression if you exercise the above average amount. If you exercise a below average amount, on the other hand, so if you're pretty sedentary, then you're going to have a 50% increased depression from your diet. So if you don't exercise much, then it's especially important that you eat less processed foods if you're trying to avoid depression. So the results of all these studies suggest that what you eat has a huge effect on depression, and specifically eating animal-based fast foods like hamburgers, sausages, and pizza are really bad for depression, as are ultra-processed foods like candy and cookies and soda. And you might be wondering why this is the case, like why would processed foods make you depressed? And there are a lot of potential reasons, but I'm going to run through a few of the most likely ones. So first, eating processed foods, especially those high in saturated fat like meat and dairy, massively increase your inflammation. This is a very well-known effect. The more meat and dairy you eat, the more saturated fat you eat, the more inflamed you are, even in your brain. And it's actually thought that depression, at least in part, is caused by inflammation or is some kind of inflammatory disease. And that's in fact a major theory of depression. And so if your diet is increasing your inflammation and depression is aggravated or caused by inflammation in part, then it makes sense that a diet that increases your inflammation is going to cause depression. And that might also explain why exercise seems to really help reduce the effect of diet on depression, because exercise is known to reduce inflammation in the long term. And another possible reason is that it's known that processed foods, especially high-fat foods, contribute to developing diseases like cardiovascular disease and diabetes, and then having diseases generally makes people depressed. But do note that in these studies, they controlled for these kinds of diseases already existing, but it's possible that they started to develop preclinical levels of the diseases from their diet over the course of the study. And another possible reason is actually explained in depth in one of my recent videos, so if you're interested, check that out, where eating a higher protein diet, which is often the case when you're eating a processed high animal product diet, might actually lower your mood because it stops tryptophan from being able to get into your brain. And then another possible reason that eating more processed foods may cause depression is that you're just missing out on a ton of micronutrients. So you're not like getting the good stuff that you would get from eating real foods, and you're missing out on all these antioxidants and phytonutrients and micronutrients like magnesium and whatnot, and that can also aggravate or help precipitate depression. So if you are one of the vast majority of the population who's been dealing with more mood issues over the last few years, then finding some relief could be as easy as changing your diet and exercise. And of course, getting professional help. You should not try to treat depression just by changing lifestyle. You should treat it like an actual disease because it is an actual disease. It's just that the organ it happens to affect is your brain, primarily. And I want to give some more details and also say thank you again to each and every one of you who has donated to the GoFundMe. I really can't tell you how much it means to me to know that you are wanting to help and support me in making this content better for you all. And I'm feeling more motivated and inspired than ever, knowing that so many of you get value from my content enough to actually help me improve it. So I really cannot properly express how much I appreciate it. And I wanted to also add a detail because some of you have nicely suggested that I try syncing audio in post and just get an external microphone and continue using this old camera. But this camera dies like randomly all the time in like 10 minutes or less. So trying to deal with that in post and sync them up would be a horrific nightmare. And I don't have good editing software because that would also cost hundreds of dollars. So it seems like the only solution that would allow me to keep doing weekly content, given my schedule, would be to get a camera that can sync with a microphone. Also, just for a little glimpse into my life and excitement, on the first day of the fundraiser last weekend, when I saw how many of you were donating and how much you were donating, my dog just wanted to come in and join me. So early on, I was literally completely blown away. Like, I never had dreamed that we would get over $200 within like 4 hours. Like, I was blown away. I literally like screamed and ran to show my husband when I checked it a few hours after starting it. So thank you for being amazing and so nice. I had no idea that so many of you appreciated this so much. And just what really means a lot to me is knowing that this content could actually be helping some of you and useful to a lot of you. So thank you for showing me that. And thank you for allowing me to invest more in this channel by being able to start a podcast, because a lot of you have said you would prefer to listen on podcasts, and I want to make that possible for you because I know a lot of us are busy and can't stare at my face or don't want to, which would be very understandable for 15 minutes per episode. So thank you again. It means so much to me. And I guess I should probably say again, if you want to help us get over the finish line and help contribute to this, link is below and up here. So yeah. If you like this video, please like and share. It helps a lot with getting this information out there so we can help people be healthier, happier, and less depressed. And if you haven't already, please subscribe and hit that notification bell to stay up to date on my videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.